I declare the Ordinary Council meeting of the 28th of May 2024 held in Council Chambers at Level 2, 388 Hay Street, Subiaco. Welcome at 5:31 p.m. Welcome councillors and staff, members of the gallery and the media. I note we've got all councillors present in person, so welcome to you, and the entire leadership team is present in person as well, which is good to see, and a number of staff members will call upon and introduce as the need arises throughout the meeting. Okay, in terms of leave of absence requests, we've got a request from Councillor Russell Jones seeking leave of absence for the period 17 June to the 27th of June inclusive. Can I have a mover and a seconder for Councillor Jones's leave request? Councillor De Vries moving, Councillor Burns seconding, and we'll be voting with buttons this evening. Great, that's carried unanimously, and I've just realised that I haven't done an acknowledgement of country, so on behalf of the City of Subiaco, I'll acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I'll recognise their ongoing connection to the land, waterways and sky of Subiaco. Okay, moving on to disclosures now. Sure, okay, we've got a request for a leave of absence from Councillor Burns as well. When will that be for?
Yeah, it'll be the next briefing and council meeting, but I don't have the dates in front of me. I haven't got it with me, so if you could, I know it's those dates, so just put something either side of it.
18th to...
Shall we say the 18th of June to the 25th of June inclusive?
Look, I may be here. It's precautionary.
Excellent. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor White and Councillor Kosovich. I'll put that to the vote. Okay, Councillor Burns' leave is approved unanimously. Okay, this evening we've already had one disclosure of interest from Councillor Johnston, whom we heard from last week, so we won't get you to repeat that, Councillor, but it was in relation to C2 and it was a proximity interest, so when that item comes up we'll ask you to leave the chamber. Are there any other disclosures this evening, councillors? Good. Okay, there were no public questions taken on notice. There's no public questions this evening, and as I understand it, no one from the public's making a public statement, nor are there any petitions or approved deputations. So, councillors, I'll ask you to confirm minutes of the previous meeting. We've got minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 23rd of April 2024. I'll seek a mover and a seconder to accept those minutes, please. Councillor White and Councillor De Vries. I'll put that to the vote. Councillor Burns, it doesn't look like you've voted.
Yeah, I was trying to, my little stickers don't have yes or no on them anymore. I was trying to work it out. It's stuck to my finger.
Good, it's carried unanimously.
It's not my problem.
Okay, announcements. It's nice to be back here this month. Last month, the CEO and I were both away for last week's OCM. We were in different places, but we do like to sync our calendars, as you can tell. But thank you to my deputy and for the acting CEO for keeping an eye on things in our absence. And we've got a full agenda this evening and some announcements, which I'll run through now in terms of things that have happened between meetings. Last week was National Volunteers Week. It's an annual celebration of all the people who selflessly give their time and skills to benefit community. And the city has over 40 volunteers, as I understand it, working in things like the library, museum, Lords, our youth council, and the positive ageing program. So what we did last week was the city gave each of our volunteers a special gift in recognition of their service, and a larger celebration will also take place at the end of the year in line with the National Volunteer Day. Councillors, you'll recall that we generally have a celebration each year to give out the National Volunteer Day Award, and we'll do so again this year, where the awards for Volunteer of the Year will be announced. Tomorrow, the City of Subiaco is launching our Reconciliation Action Plan, and it formalises our commitment to learning from history and respecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, and working towards reconciliation. So it's quite timely that the launch of that RAP will take place during National Reconciliation Week, tying in with reconciliation efforts across the nation. So more to come on that tomorrow. And the final quick announcement I'll make is in relation to the city's economic development strategy. Councillors, you'd recall that the city's reviewing the strategy, and we've tried a new way of working by forming a task force or a task team for that specific purpose. So as part of that process, there will be a survey going out. Well, it's opening today, in fact, and it'll be open until the 18th of June. We want to hear from local residents, property owners, visitors, workers and businesses regarding economic development in Subiaco over the next 5 years. I'm pretty pleased that we've got this far with the specially constituted Economic Development Task Team. It's comprised of a selection of elected members, including myself, Councillor Johnston and Councillor White, economic development staff, and we're being ably assisted by external consultants. So I encourage as many people as possible to complete that survey so that we can set some direction and set our approach to economic development for the years to come. Okay, so that's the end of announcements. We'll move through the agenda items. At the moment, I've got a possible en bloc vote in relation to a number of agenda items which haven't been the subject of proposed amendments or alternatives. So the en bloc vote I've got in front of me at the moment would consist of items C1, C3, C5, and that's it. Does anyone want to pull any of those 3 items from the en bloc vote? Good. Okay, I'll seek a mover and a seconder for the en bloc vote then. Just confirming that'll be C1, C3 and C5. Councillor Kosovich moving and Councillor O'Connor seconding. I'll put the en bloc vote to the vote, en bloc motion to the vote. Okay, the en bloc vote's carried unanimously, which means that items C1, C3 and C5 have been carried without debate as per the officer recommendations. And that brings us, councillors, to the remaining items for this evening. C1's been dealt with, so we'll move on to C2, the proposed Park Street Heritage Area. And we'll have Councillor Johnston leave. And I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation. Councillor Kosovich moving and Councillor O'Connor seconding. Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. The officer report has considered the submissions received on the proposal and has recommended that Council designates the Park Street area and proceeds with draft local planning policy 3.15 Park Street Heritage without modification. Having read the submissions, I now endorse this recommendation. At this juncture, I would also like to revisit the reason the City has designated heritage areas and explain to elected members and our community, and also the man sitting in the gallery, how and why they were deemed necessary. The West Australian newspaper carried a story in December 2009 regarding prominent Subiaco resident Maxine Prentice of residents acting together for equity in the streetscapes, who said conservation policies were generally not embedded in local town planning schemes and were, quote, poorly designed and poorly consulted. So they were largely ineffective. She said heritage was often wrongly dismissed as being only a link to a famous person or an architectural style. It's an issue of history, it's an issue of character, it's an issue of streetscape, Ms Prentice said. And she concluded with, it's a matter of the community looking at what it's got here and valuing what we've got. The Subiaco Stoush came as residents in Mount Lawley, Monora and Coolbinia fought to keep their 100-year-old covenants that protected the low-density character of their neighbourhoods and removal of the restricted covenants which permitted only one dwelling on each block, which would allow big blocks to be subdivided and multiple dwellings put in place on grand old homes. This ultimately led to the state government updating planning legislation to standardise the process for designating heritage areas in WA. The deemed provisions of the Planning and Development Local Planning Scheme Regulations 2015 provide the mechanism for local governments to designate heritage areas. If, in the opinion of local government, special planning control is needed to conserve and enhance the cultural heritage significance and character of an area. Following the adoption of the Strategic Community Plan in 2012, and in response to the community's aspiration and priority regarding heritage, the City commenced a process of identifying and protecting the City's heritage places. Kershaw Street was identified as a potential heritage area through site visits and information contained in the local heritage survey and was the first heritage area considered by Council. Following extensive engagement and consultation with property owners, similar to the process undertaken for the proposed Park Street heritage area, Council designated Kershaw Street area as a heritage area in February 2013. The City's other heritage areas have been identified through the local heritage survey and/or heritage studies, i.e. the Chester's subdivision, Hammersley Road Group and Redfern and Sadleir Street, or they were nominated for consideration by a resident of the area, i.e. Kings Road, Duke Street and Rawson Street. I commend this report to you.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, and through you. Subiaco has long been known and valued for its character, which is largely defined by its 19th and early 20th century building stock. Today, we are lucky that so many successive owners have valued these buildings and continue to take such good care of them. Council has been working for many years on a range of initiatives to recognise the value people have for the heritage of Subiaco. This is a gradual process, and it's important that it's underpinned by rigorous research and investigation, such as the documentation that's been compiled on the proposed Park Street heritage area. Heritage designations have a dual role. They not only recognise the elements that make a contribution to the cultural heritage significance of an area and prioritise their conservation, they also include buildings that do not make a contribution. I appreciate that this can be very confusing to owners. Why include a building if it's not making a contribution? The reason it's important to include these elements is to ensure that any new building is sympathetic to its historic neighbours. It's important to stress that protective mechanisms, such as heritage areas, are not about stopping change. They are about making careful decisions about change so that the things that are most valued are not negatively impacted. Many studies show that designating heritage areas does not negatively impact property values. In many cases, the impact is an increase in value because heritage designation brings greater certainty that the historic character will be conserved and that new development is appropriate. Nevertheless, to support owners in heritage areas, the City provides a number of incentives, including grants, to help with the cost of undertaking conservation works. While I acknowledge that not all owners are happy with the proposed designation, there were strong submissions in support. Furthermore, the 2023 Market Scorecard, the annual survey that gauges public perceptions of the work done by the Council, showed strong support for what the City is doing in relation to the preservation and promotion of local heritage. Subiaco was identified as leading the industry in this regard. For these reasons, I support the motion.
Thank you. Any speakers against the officer recommendation? Councillor Burns. Speak. Just want to speak? Okay. If there's no speakers against, I'll hear from you. Councillor Burns.
Look, I just would like to note something Councillor Connor just said, which I do appreciate, because I've long argued that there's always been a broad adoption of the concept that all heritage makes things worth more money. Okay, it just has been across the board. And in speaking, you use the word many. Okay, and I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that you are quite correct. Yes, it does. Heritage generally, right? But it's just not a 100% deal. And I just think it's important that we do acknowledge that it's just been a long argued issue that it's just this across the board. If it's old, it's worth more. Well, arguably that's just not the case. So I would like to appreciate your understanding of things must be looked at individually. But I do support the motion. Thank you.
Any other speakers for or against the officer recommendation? Councillor White.
Thank you. Just briefly, at the ABF, I asked about what were the studies that were referenced in the staff's recommendations, studies about how heritage affected investment performance and these kind of things. And I just wanted to acknowledge and thank the staff for the six or seven research studies that were sent to me that I looked through, which all, some of them quite substantial in terms of being independent, which showed that, and so it gives me more confidence in voting in favour of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Kosovich, do you want to close? I'll put the item to the vote. Councillor Burns? Okay, the item's carried unanimously with a vote of 8-0. If someone wouldn't mind asking Councillor Johnston to come back in, we'll slowly make our way to the next item. We have dealt with C3 as part of the en-bloc vote.
You just put it up as 8. There's only 7 there.
No, there were 8 in the room when we called the vote.
Sorry.
That's all right.
7 and the mayor. Sorry, and the mayor. And the mayor.
I get a vote as well. Welcome back, Councillor Johnston. We're moving on to C4 now. The standardised meeting procedures consultation. We've got the officer recommendation with a proposed submission to the state government on local government reforms, and we've had a number of amendments submitted by councillors Powell and De Vries and myself as well. So I'll see if someone's prepared to move the officer recommendation to get the item on the table, and then we'll see which amendments have some support. Do I have a mover and a seconder for C4? Councillor Jones moving. Councillor O'Connor seconding. Councillor Jones. Councillor O'Connor. Okay, we'll move through the amendments so that we've got a better picture of what we're debating and voting on. And I'll do them in the order in front of me. If I can find my sheet. Okay, the first 2 amendments are from Councillor Powell. Councillor, I understand you've submitted them as separate amendments, so we'll debate and vote on them one at a time. I'll just confirm which one we'll deal with first. Okay, it's an amendment to the response to question 16 of the consultation paper as shown on the screen and as submitted prior to the meeting. Councillor Powell will move, no doubt. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Powell's amendment to question 16, which is about the ability to direct a member to leave a meeting? Councillor Kosovich seconding. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, as not much has been said, just as a little preamble, Governance is a fairly dry matter for debate and probably not one of a great deal of interest to, I think, many in our community. But it is a key to what we do and how our meetings run, and that's governed by our standing orders or meeting procedures. Look, I once heard if a council's functioning properly, the meeting procedures are rarely opened. It's only when things get a bit rough that the rules of engagement are brought out. And I'm glad to see that that hasn't been happening too much in the last 4 years. And it's also probably worthwhile noting here that not all local governments share the same standing orders. So getting some unanimity is probably not a bad thing, as the government is aiming. However, I am concerned about a couple of proposals in the new standing orders. And one in particular is the one that the Mayor just described, giving the presiding member the power to silence an unruly member for the rest of the meeting, and punishments if they don't abide by the gag. Now, to me, that's a bit of an overreach. So, look, I'm going to be addressing the standing orders as they are our standing orders, the City of Subiaco's meeting procedures. And look, they work pretty well for us. I notice in the officer comment that it's appropriate for the presiding member to have appropriate measures to allow them to maintain order during the meeting. So, first of all, under our current standing orders, under 5.6, I think the presiding member already has the power to quiet an unruly member. But it's only for the duration of the item under the debate, not for the rest of the meeting. So bringing in a new rule about someone ignoring 3 calls to order seems unnecessary in any case, because the presiding member already has the power without any of those constraints. The officer comments also notes that under our standing orders there is a procedural motion, 7.9, that the member no longer be heard. Now, that involves the full council making a decision. So it's a council view, not just the presiding member. And again, it's just for the item under debate. However, it seems that under the new model, our 7.9 procedural motion, which is common amongst many councils, makes behaviour a full council responsibility, has been dropped, meaning that only the presiding member has the power to order a member not to speak. So in effect, under this model, EMs will lose their voice unless they want to move a motion to disagree with the presiding member. And look, I just don't think that is a particularly good way of approaching it. But what alarms me further is that the ban in the proposed model is for the rest of the meeting. Now, how is that going to work? If a councillor is banned from speaking from future items on the agenda that may have no relation to the item for which the ban was imposed, they still have to vote under the Local Government Act, but they can't tell anyone why they're voting one way or another. And look, what happens if they're moving an item in regard to their ward, but they can't speak to it, or second the item? Even more to the point, if they have an elected member's motion or an urgent business motion and they can't speak to them. Look, I think this is an ill-considered part of the model. It seems to me that doing away with a procedural motion that has worked so effectively for us, even if it has been very rarely used, and across many other councils, transferring that power to the presiding member, who in most instances already has the power to silence an unruly member from speaking further on an item, well, that's just overreach and unnecessary. So in my view, the response to question 16 is that what's being proposed is not good governance and not fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kosbich.
I concur with Councillor Powell's submission. I think it's needlessly pedantic, and I think it usurps the powers of councillors, and I don't think it achieves anything in the good governance of the council's general business. Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers against the amendment? Any remaining speakers for the amendment?
Sorry, I'm against. Hang on. I'm for the amendment.
Okay. Councillor Burns.
I'm not having a good night. Thank you, Mayor McMullen, councillors. We currently have the right to push that the speaker no longer be heard. Okay. from memory, it's really just regards to that particular item. You can shut them down. I believe I'm correct in that. If the CEO nods at me, it's not no longer heard for the rest of the meeting. I agree with the suggestion put forward by the two previous speakers, but because just in essence, there's more complications I see about this. All right. You know, I mean, there are certain rules, and somebody as well behaved as myself. You know, what I mean, right? Not that I'm frightened or anything. Okay, that I might one day, you know, what I mean, put a foot fault in a tennis court. But I just think, you know, I mean, probably being the worst of us, that it's just not getting us where we want to be. I can see change is necessary, but I don't you know, I mean, support this in this particular case. And I think when they talk about standardising all councils, that seems very difficult for me, because, you know, what we do in Subiaco and what people do in Kalgoorlie, you know what I mean, where everybody leaves the room and goes to the same pub for a beer and, you know, all this sort of stuff. You know what I mean, standardisation is not, to me, I think there are in certain circumstances, but this part of standardisation in local government I don't think works. You know, one local, you know, I mean, what's even, forgetting Kalgoorlie, you know, I mean, what's Subiaco and Peppermint Grove got to do with each other? You know what I mean? They're just different operating entities. I'll leave those thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers to the amendment? I'll call the vote on the amendment. Okay, Councillor Powell's first amendment is carried unanimously. So we'll move on to Councillor Powell's second amendment, which would be in relation to question 31 of the consultation paper, relating to changes to electronic meeting attendance frameworks. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Powell's amendment? Councillor Johnston seconding. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. Look, I think I can be fairly confident in saying that the pandemic came as a pretty big shock to everyone. And it certainly caused some big changes here at the city. It caused big changes in how we attended council meetings in particular. The state government was forced to update antiquated rules on how we attended council meetings to meet the social distancing requirements. So we all ended up meeting electronically, a screen full of faces, and look, after a bit of bumbling along at first, it became the norm. It's people working from home. And look, that's pretty much throughout society. The workspace has changed and the world has changed with it. Now, there's nothing unusual about attending a workshop these days, or a committee, or even a council meeting where one or more of the faces are on the screen. We've become accustomed to it. That's how we work in the beginning of the 21st century. And I repeat, it's not just us here. It's wherever communications are adequate, it's becoming universal. But in this new proposed model, we still have a harbinger, I think, of the past in our proposed meeting procedures. And that's that elected members cannot attend any more than 50% of council meetings electronically in a year. They must be physically present for 50% of them. So that's an arbitrary figure. I mean, 50%, you know, why 50%? Why not any number, or preferably no number? Because I think it's that type of constriction or restriction is no longer reflective of the current workplace and work methods. The technology, the communications, the process for attending meetings electronically is well known and proven and used productively, and it can improve productivity. If someone's travelling or ill or can't be physically present, a councillor can still take part and represent their community, except in the case of some artificial bar saying that half the meetings you must be sitting here physically present for with your other EMs, and for the community to hear your views via live streaming. Look, that's just not the case anymore. It also, another aspect is also means that in most cases councillors can be assured of having a quorum, even if you've got some people with the flu and are being socially responsible and they don't want to share it, so they're not going to be here in person, or someone working overseas. Look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really take too many to put a quorum in doubt, especially where a committee is concerned and there might be only a few members on it. So, look, on a personal basis, I know that I prefer to attend meetings in person, and I think most of us do. But let's not miss out on attendance by elected members because of some outdated rule. Thank you.
Councillor Johnston.
Yes, thank you. I support Councillor Powell's amendment. I think, it's in keeping with most current workplaces today with greater flexibility, ability to work from home, and it still requires authorisation from the Mayor, President or Council. So if someone was, doing this all the time and maybe taking advantage of that, there's the option to not authorise it. But I think it's in line with current workplace trends.
Thank you. Speaker against the amendment, Councillor de Vries.
I'm somewhat on the fence, and maybe I'll be persuaded by some more discussion. But when I first read that, I was concerned that that would set a precedent and kind of establish a relationship with between elected members and their community, which would be more distant. Whereas I see my role pretty much as embedded within the community, and bearing in mind that the Local Government Act, pretty much puts the role of councillors not just attending meetings, but obviously we provide leadership and guidance to the community. So I see the meeting somewhat like the top of the iceberg, and underneath the iceberg is where all the work is being done. And if we're not physically present, I think it kind of gives a perception to the wider community that perhaps what's going underneath the iceberg is that we're distant and remote. And I think I too agree that during the COVID period and the new workplace practices that we have seen a change in how we do things. But I'm personally of the view that some of those changes were by necessity, and some of those changes have made us more distant and less connected to each other. So from my philosophical point of view, I kind of feel that we should be not making it easier for people not to be present. And I do also, take the position that if we were sick, unwell for a prolonged period of time, we could take leave of absence if we'd used up our quota. Or we could perhaps have a special exemption and attend. It would be awful if I fell ill and then I couldn't attend because I'd used up my six meetings online and I still wanted to participate. But there might come a period where I'd say, well, perhaps I should no longer be doing that role because I can't fulfil the other functions as well. So I feel that that's really what's guiding me in not supporting the amendment, although maybe I can still be persuaded if some other speakers want to talk and support it. Thank you so much, though, for bringing it up.
Speaker 4, Councillor White.
Yeah, I think, as most people know, I'm somewhat biased in this topic, particularly because it's led to my resignation of a committee for fear that I will be caught afoul of this. Thanks to Councillor Powell for raising it. I think, in the email about in preparation for this meeting, I didn't want to be putting it forward because I am somewhat biased. But I just want to address one or two things. I do think it's about flexibility, and I agree with speakers who have talked about, this is the new world in which we live in. We are, again, without, being disparaging of people who travel or people who are not, are we looking at members who are only retired who should be members because they have actively involved? Many working members will be drawn away for work meetings at times. We do vote on when the meeting dates will be, but once they're there, and we don't expect to change meeting dates to suit everybody. So we have to try, and in a working life, we have to try and fit in as best we can. I just want to take, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but I just want to take an issue with the staff's response to this. This first paragraph talks about increased flexibility, and absolutely, I think, that's what it's about. The second one says that by fostering stronger engagement, having a limit is useful. I disagree with that, because I think in my situation, it would be a situation of I would have to send my apologies to a meeting rather than be allowed to participate in a meeting. And that's the reason why, in my case, I decided it's better that I withdraw from that committee, because I wouldn't want to send an apology which could potentially make that meeting incorrect. And so I think what we are actually about is stronger engagement. To say to somebody you should be an apology and not attend, instead of attending online, doesn't seem to be equivalent to me. And finally, the point that's made in the last, again, this may be unintentional, but the requirement for elected members to seek permission from the presiding member, which is very appropriate, empowers them. I agree with that. I think we should empower the presiding member of a committee or of the council to make that decision, and I'm very comfortable with that. But I think what it does is, if we adopt this idea of a 12-month limit, that doesn't empower the presiding member to do that. It says, no, your boundary is there. You can't decide on this matter. So I think the issues that Councillor De Vries raised, for example, if somebody's flouting the rule and so on, if it's still up to the presiding member to make a call on this, I think that's appropriate and gives flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker against the amendment. Speaker for. Okay, well, I will take the opportunity to enter the debate. I'll speak against the amendment, and I'll do so, and I'm sure I can do so without those who travel taking any offence to what I say. Look, I think we need to distinguish between council meetings and committee meetings. The very real issue that brought this to a head was in the context of a committee, and Councillor Powell would have had me with his amendment if it distinguished between council meetings and committee meetings. Look, I'm all for flexibility. I think in a standard corporate job that some of us still work when we're not here, we expect flexibility. We expect to be able to work electronically, but the nature of this role as members of council is different, and I can tell you, having presided over these meetings for 2.5 years, that it does make for better meetings to have the whole council in a room for each council meeting. So I think we do need to impose a limit of some kind, and I think given that we meet as a council about 12 times a year, if we get to a stage where a councillor is not in person at 7 or more of those meetings, then there is a problem. That's not to say that we wouldn't keep engaging and keep communicating and keep working together, but I think 50% in-person attendance is quite reasonable. So for that reason, I'm not supporting this amendment. And look, if we get as far as debating mine, I'll speak a bit more about how I might like to see a distinction between council and committee meetings. But that won't be necessary if we take the view that there need not be any minimum in-person attendance at any meetings. So I'm speaking against the amendment just because it lacks that distinction, and I'm happy to hear from any other speakers on the amendment before I call the vote.
I have a question.
Yeah, Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Just to help me better decide and better understanding, I've never really, and probably haven't looked into it enough to grasp it, but okay, so we have the legislation that says you have to attend so many in person, so many electronically. That's fine. Okay. How, and then answer this question. I probably will be here, but because I just did it with proper caution. But okay, so how many? I know I think you can miss 3 meetings through illness or something like that, and you can apply to the minister to miss 6 or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Outside of that, you can make an application to the minister to miss even more meetings, right? You don't. Nobody needs to look it up, but it's something like that, okay? But how do those numerics affect the 50%? So let's say you said to the minister, I would, you know what I mean, I'm dying of cancer and I want 6 months off. Does that mean on the 50% you'd only actually have to attend three meetings in person and the rest of the year? I just don't. I think you need to understand the mathematics of this before we vote on it. So I'd like a little clarity if I could ask for it, please.
It's probably best we ask someone who is good at maths, and Director of Corporate Services is dying to answer this, but tell me if I'm wrong, Director. Under the proposed model, you could miss 50%, well, you could attend 50% of the meetings electronically, and you could just miss 3 meetings without explanation, and on top of that, you could apply for leave. So you could effectively miss a year's worth of meetings, in-person attendance at meetings under the proposed reforms.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I think that's right. I've got the clause in the regulations in front of me in terms of approving electronic attendance. So the Mayor, President or Council cannot authorise a member to attend a meeting under electronically, let's just say that, if the member's attendance at the proposed meeting under that authorisation would result in the member attending more than half of the meetings under such an authorisation. So it's a long-winded way of saying it's a long-winded way of saying that the Mayor can't approve somebody to attend more than half of the meetings in the 12-month period up to and including that date electronically. So I guess that would be no more than 6, regardless of what they did on the other days.
You look confused, Councillor.
How much can a lazy man get away with?
How much can one get away with, Director of Corporate Services?
A moment. Thank you, Presiding Members. So, look, it gets complicated because, say, for example, there were special council meetings that would add to the count. So what the governance team does for us is they maintain a count of how many electronic meetings anybody's attended in the last 12 months out of all of the meetings that they've attended in the last 12 months. So for council meetings, there'd be a line against each person saying, how many have you attended in the last 12 months and have you attended more than half of them electronically? So that's pretty much how it works. So you would actually have to attend a meeting for it to go into your count, right? Yeah. Yeah, so whether you attended in person or electronically, that would go towards the count. So let's say that you attended, look, I'm not going to try with an example because it'll probably complicate things further, but I hope that helps.
Councillor White, question? No more questions or speakers, I'll call the vote. Okay, the amendment's carried 6-3. Moving on to the next amendment, Councillor De Vries' amendment. And it relates to question 22 of the consultation paper about a proposal to introduce questions from council members into the order of business under the new standing orders. Councillor De Vries, we will have you move your amendment and I'll look for a seconder. Councillor O'Connor. Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, I haven't got a lot of stories to tell about this because I'm still saying yes to time limits because I think we have had meetings that have gone on for way past the witching hour and then into the next day. So sometimes there are situations where time limits should be imposed, but they're quite rare. So I'm particularly concerned that we de-link time limits to questions from council members, really. But I mean, I think we should have some time limits if that means the meeting's going, past 11 o'clock at night, which I think is easy to achieve because that can be organised within the current meeting procedures and the ones that are proposed. We can also adjourn the meeting to a later point. But I think since we've already got the idea that we can continue to ask questions, I just think it's to put it in writing. We can continue to ask questions at OCMs, but if they're substantially related to the business of the meeting. I think that the impression I got from the reasons given by the city is that all questions should be asked at the agenda briefing or in other forums. So perhaps I got the wrong impression from the response, but I think it should be quite clear that elected members should continue to be able to ask questions at the OCM, the Ordinary Council meeting, particularly if an issue has become quite complicated. It may be necessary for there to be quite a few questions, and it might not be possible for those questions to be asked prior to the Ordinary Council meeting. But, it's really a question of the timing of a meeting. If it's to try and restrict the timing of a meeting, I'm sure that there are other ways for that to be achieved. And I'm sure that it's also quite fair for there to be a maximum time limit for questions from council members. It's just that I don't think we should be restricted in asking questions at an ordinary council meeting. And I don't think it's even possible for us not to have questions at an ordinary council meeting. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor McMullen, I support this motion. I guess there are 3 points at which members can ask questions. There's in advance at an agenda briefing meeting or through emailing. There's the proposal to have a question period up front in the agenda. And then there's in the meeting. And as we've seen today, Councillor Burns has asked a very good question during the meeting. So I think it's important to articulate that we value the capacity for councillors to have that opportunity to ask questions should the need arise during an agenda item. You cannot possibly front load everything in advance. So I see this amendment as just an important safeguard to note how much we value that opportunity. Thank you.
Excellent. Any speakers against the amendment? Speaker for, Councillor Burns.
This is really not for or against it, but something I'd have the elected members and everybody else note out of interest. Look, everybody knows that planning has slipped away from us, faster than we'd like. And we sit here tonight with, half a dozen things on the agenda. Arguably, if it wasn't for Councillor Powell's excellent amendments, right, we'd probably all be gone by now. So, a long time ago, when I joined council in the 80s, we used to go to 2 and 3 in the morning. I think the law now states that after midnight, you actually have to start another meeting because you can't actually go into the next day. But it was 2 and 3 in the morning. We were still debating things because there was no time limits, no amount of times you could speak. But that's really not, I just tossed it in because it's interesting to me. But with the shortening up of this, we're almost going to end up, if we don't have some questions and a few bits and pieces, it's going to take longer to drive here than it is the amount of time at the meeting. But I'll leave it at that. I think you get my point that we have a little more time on our hands than we once did.
Any speakers for or against? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supporting Councillor Debree's right here to continue asking questions. I think that's our job. We're here to ask questions. We're here to interrogate things we don't understand on behalf of the community, mostly too. And I think that should happen at all opportunities. Questions do come up due to the debate, and we should never want to stifle that. Thank you.
Any other speakers? I'll call the vote on the amendment. The amendment's carried unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to 4 amendments which I've submitted. Look, I'll try and do it from here. If we get into extended debate, I'll vacate the chair, but I'll know that's coming once we get underway. Look, I'll just start at the top. The first amendment would be to question 2 of the consultation paper about the possibility of having council meetings earlier than 8 a.m. or later than 8 p.m. Is there anyone to second my amendment? Councillor De Vries, thank you. Okay, I'll just speak briefly to the amendment. The question that we'd be responding to follows question 1 of the consultation paper. Question 1 talks about the situations in which special council meetings ought to be able to be convened with 24 hours notice. And the response to that question is, yes, there are times when you need to call special council meetings at short notice, but there should be certain voting requirements and specific time limits should be placed on the purpose of the meeting if called at short notice. And the thinking would be that meetings called in unusual circumstances or at short notice are difficult for staff to prepare for, they're difficult for councillors to prepare for, and they generally don't facilitate community participation. So it follows, in my view, that the way we answer question 2 of the consultation paper should be approached in a similar vein. Question 2, of course, is talking about meetings starting earlier than 8 a.m. and later than 8 p.m. It would be pretty unusual, and I'd suggest an emergency type situation if we had to call a special council meeting that started late or finished early in the morning. And I would just want to ensure that wherever possible, meetings are being called with as much notice as possible, and that special council meetings are generally reserved for the most urgent of situations, which is why I just propose we still answer yes to question 2 as staff have recommended, but that we just tie our answer to question 2 in with how we've answered question 1, just so that special council meetings are being called in a predictable, orderly kind of way that allows for preparation by staff, preparation by council members, and maximum opportunities for community participation. So I hope you'll support the first of my 4 amendments. Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, I think the expectation that we need just a reasonable amount of time for a special council meeting is a good one, and I support this amendment. Thank you.
Any speakers against the amendment? Any other speakers for?
I've got a question.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, through you, and to you, Mayor. Do you intend to break up all of your amendments into separate amendments?
Yes, they've been. Yes, they will be debated and voted on separately.
Okay, thank you.
So we're just voting on the first of my 4 amendments, and this one relates to question 2 of the consultation paper only. Okay, I'll call the vote. Okay, that amendment's carried unanimously. So thank you, everyone. The next amendment relates to question 14 of the consultation paper about the proposal to extend public statements to 5 minutes per statement. My amendment proposes that we maintain the status quo based on our long-standing practice at the City. Do I have a seconder for my amendment? Councillor Burns, you can second me. Or are you asking a question?
No, I'm Seconding you.
Oh, good. Okay, look, I'll just speak briefly to this one too. Look, I want to stress that as tempting as it may be to say, yes, let's give every member of the public 5 minutes per presentation, the reality is it's a non-issue for Subiaco. I'm not entirely sure how long we've had a 3-minute time limit on public statements, but I dare say it's going into decades and beyond. In my experience, sitting and listening to statements, the more concise and targeted a statement is, the more effective it's going to be on the night of a council meeting, because there's a lot of information being taken in, and ideally there's been consultation and communication with community members prior to a meeting. So really it's a final attempt to make some key points to keep them fresh in the minds of council. And the more inefficient a presentation is in terms of language, I think it actually erodes the purpose of the public statement. And I do think that public participation can be facilitated, encouraged using the existing 3-minute standard time limit, because firstly, city governance staff already work with members of the public who submit long statements, and that they work with them to get them down in accordance with the time limits, and generally that makes for shorter, snappier, more effective presentations. The second safeguard, I suppose, is that the Mayor retains discretion to allow a member of the public to exceed their allocated time. And I must say it is hard to cut people off when they're mid-sentence, and generally I'll let them sum up and go a little bit over their time if it comes to it. And look, there's a further 2 safeguards under the proposed reforms, in that it's now proposed that a new procedural motion will be introduced to extend the time for public presentations. So if the meeting wants to hear from members of the public longer than the time limit allows and the Mayor allows, then there'll be the opportunity for a procedural motion. And let's not forget, public presentations are supplemented by public questions, often from people who will both make a statement and ask a question. So my approach to a number of these amendments is that if experience shows that the system's working, we needn't support every amendment just because it's been put to us as part of a suite of standard reforms. Thank you. Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Look, you touched upon it, but I think you're a little more generous than you even stated about yourself. Even with the most disgruntled of public speakers, I've never seen you shut anybody down in 3 minutes. You've always allowed them to finish them off. You've given warnings on summing up. You've asked polite questions about how much more they've got to go, all sorts of things. So, call it 3 minutes, but let's face it, it's not. You allow people the opportunity to, especially on passionate issues, to express themselves, etc. So I support you. Obviously, well, not obviously, because I haven't waited till the end of the debate. Until the end of the debate, I'm currently supporting. Thank you.
Any speakers against the amendment? Speakers for? I'll call the vote. Okay, that one's carried unanimously too. Thank you, everyone. Okay, my third of 4 amendments is in relation to question 31, and I note that Councillor Powell's amendment has successfully amended that already, but I would still like to test the support for that first paragraph you can see up on the screen, because I think there still is clarification on something needed. So if Council were minded to do so, I'd be looking for your support in maintaining our yes response. Councillor Powell's amendment stays in, and as an additional paragraph, we ask for clarification about how the 12 months works when there's been an election or a reappointment to committees, simply because we don't know if the state is going to take our view of the world. They may want to still impose the 50% in-person attendance rule, and if that's the case, I think we will need some clarity on how that works following an election. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor O'Connor, seconding, thank you. Okay, well, look, I think I've more or less debated in support of the amendment already. I think there is some ambiguity in the regulations as they presently read, based on the real life example we've seen unfold, and it would benefit from clarification if there's going to be a 50% in-person attendance rule going forward. It does seem that it's arguable at the moment that that you are essentially almost disadvantaged if you are a member of a committee pre and post an election. So I think there may be some merit in seeking that clarification. Thank you. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yes, I'm very happy to second this. I think it's really important to have clarity for members to know exactly when the clock starts ticking and when, if you're limited to 50% of attendance, then you've reached that limit. I think with regulation, the devil is always in the detail, and it's really important that that is provided to us and all other elected members. Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers against the amendment? Councillor White.
Well, thank you, and through you. It's not exactly against, because I certainly, I in fact, probably intend to vote favour of it. But the issue for me about clarity, yes, I would like to see more clarity, but I understand we got clarity. That's how I took my decision, that from the Director of Corporate Services, after looking into it, came back and said, no, the rule is this. And it was on that basis that I tendered my resignations, because I was concerned. So, I mean, so everyone is clear, my concern was the Audit and Risk Committee was only formed in November, and yet they were counting my attendance in the previous Audit and Risk Committee as well, which seemed odd. But my understanding was that we came back with clarity on that. So I think my understanding is we are clear. So now we're asking for more clarity. I'm a bit confused by that.
There's very few things that are clear in the eyes of the law, but Director of Corporate Services, maybe you could confirm who advice was taken from and whether there is still merit in getting further clarity on the position.
Thank you, presiding member. So at the time, the question was whether Councillor White had attended more than half of his meetings electronically in the prior 12 months in relation to the Audit and Risk Committee. The answer was, in relation to that particular meeting, that he would just be achieving half at that meeting. And then the question was, how would that then apply at the next meeting? And at the time, we determined that it wouldn't actually matter what the ruling was around whether meetings prior to the election counted, because the first meeting within the 12-month period where he attended electronically was on the early in July, and the next council meeting won't be until late in July, and so that meeting was actually going to be wiped off his slate anyway, so that if he wanted to attend the next July Audit and Risk Committee meeting electronically, he would be able to, and still not pass his 50% attendance. Now, with regards to the legislation, it's still a little bit unclear, because it says that the Mayor can only approve you to attend up to half of your meetings electronically in the prior 12 months at any particular council or committee meeting. It doesn't actually specify whether you have to be a member of that committee for the whole time, if you can drop in and come back out again. Is it a new committee if there's an election, or do you still count from prior to the last election? So yeah, it didn't actually matter in this specific instance, but it could matter, in a hypothetical case in the future.
Thank you. This is why we have lawyers, but the good news is we'll be taking nominations for the Audit and Risk Committee next month. Councillor White. We're going to be reappointing. Okay, are there any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Powell.
Yeah, look, I've just got a question about how the my amendment, my first one and this one will sit together, and I'm wondering whether just the addition of the words, if, with the approval of the mover and the seconder, of course, would, if you put Part B at the top, then that would clearly distinguish that you've got two separate resolutions.
I agree, but can I raise you one and suggest that we say, like, put some words in that if a 50% attendance required is maintained, and then the rest of what I have proposed flows on from that?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make sure that the two actually sit together.
Okay, so just for clarity, Councillor Powell's amendment will be, we'll call it paragraph A. This amendment, if carried, will be paragraph B, and it will open with the words that if a 50% in-person attendance required is maintained, then further clarification is needed, full stop. Can we get that up on the screen? The new paragraph B, if carried, would read that if a 50% in-person attendance is maintained, further clarification is needed, full stop. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, I think we're ready to call a vote on that amendment now. Thank you. That's carried unanimously as well. So the final amendment I'm proposing is one to reinforce the message which I think staff were making in their proposed response anyway to question 34 of the consultation paper. It's the very last question, and the paper asks if there's any other comments or suggestions. So the amendment would reinforce the theme that there's a number of local governments across the state, 137 in fact, and their circumstances are different, and there would be some merit in having the ability to supplement the meeting procedures if they're treated as model procedures. And the wording's up on the screen. So I wonder if there's a seconder for that as well. Councillor De Vries, thank you. Okay, look, it's pretty self-explanatory, I think, but I shouldn't assume that. I'll speak to the amendment briefly. Look, it's almost an avoidance of doubt statement that even if these new meeting procedures are adopted, we would be seeking to ensure that City of Subiaco, like the other local governments across the state, do have the ability to add to the model procedures or to adopt additional procedures that sit alongside the standard procedures. And it's all about a recognition, I suppose, that good governance is not one size fits all, and what works for Subiaco and the good governance of people in our district may or may not work in a different local government district. I've heard it said this evening that a well-run meeting or council should not require a presiding member to pull out the rules too often, and I thoroughly agree. And I think we need to be retaining the ability to continue doing what we do wherever possible, without falling into a heavily regulated, rigid model of meeting procedures that the state deems suitable for all local governments across the state, because that would be possibly good for some local governments, but I would think not particularly good for us. So I hope I'll have your support in just adding to the officer response to really make the point that Subiaco is one of the good ones, and we'd like to write our own rules to some extent going forward. Thank you.
I have to support this because it's sensible, and I think the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all, a standardised approach will not be appropriate. With those 137 local governments, there's very small ones, there's medium-sized, there's cities, there's towns, there's different ways of communicating within councils, and I think a lot of the meeting procedures and how they're implemented really does depend a huge amount on the presiding member and how they use those or don't. But I do think the idea that we can have something as a standard that we can work with is probably a good one, in so far as perhaps there's always a chance for renewal. Just looking at our standard meeting procedures, our local meeting law was written 2013 or updated. So, I mean, this is also an opportunity for us to update a bit. That's good. So, I just think it's good to add in that extra little push to make sure that it's a model meeting procedure only. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Councillor. Any speakers against? Any other speakers for? Okay, I'll call the vote. Okay, that amendment's carried unanimously as well. Thank you, everyone. Now we can move on. We've still got to vote on the substantive item as amended. So we've got the officer recommendation as amended by Councillor Powell twice, Councillor De Vries and myself as well. Basically, we would be resolving to authorise the CEO to submit the response prepared by staff with the amendments we've just been debating. Okay, well, look, I'll take speakers for or against the amended officer recommendation if there's still an appetite. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, look, I'm going to be very brief. Look, I just want to say the meeting procedures are very important to how the council functions. And look, I want to thank staff as well, because they're quite detailed, and they've certainly put quite a bit of effort into considering the responses. Now, with these amendments tonight, we have parted ways with staff on a couple of the responses. But look, I don't think that's any reflection on staff. In fact, I think it's a good thing. It shows that while there's agreement on most things, and the rules for running the meeting, I suspect, are equally important for elected members and staff, we're able to come to a stance where our combined views are being represented. And on the majority, we do have the same views. So I think that's healthy, that we're able to take on, that staff have been able to take on those divergent views as well, and help us express them. So, I'd just like to commend staff as well as other elected members who put quite a bit of work into this. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Jones, do you want to close?
Yes, I'd just say that I think the length of this debate has indicated the serious nature with which we contemplate these issues, and I commend all the councillors.
Thank you. I'll call the vote. Okay, C4 is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Moving through the agenda, C5 was carried on block earlier. That related to the financial statements and reports. So moving along, there's no elected member motions of which previous notice has been given this evening. No one's raised any urgent business with me prior to the meeting, so I assume there is none. And I will therefore seek a mover and a seconder for a procedural motion to go behind closed doors so that we can consider a number of confidential items. And it's proposed that we'd be going behind closed doors because we'll be dealing with items which relate to a proposed contract and a matter which could reasonably be expected to impair the effectiveness of lawful methods of investigation or endanger security or prejudice the maintenance or enforcement of local measures for protecting public safety, which all sounds very serious, but that's just the standard wording in the Act. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the procedural motion, please?
Just before you do, if I could raise one matter. Look, it just came from a member of the public today asking about when the council moves into the confidential meeting, that the reasons that are given are attributed more attributed to the actual subjects that are coming up. So it's more clearly delineated what reasons are associated with which items we're going to be discussing.
Okay, I'll bear that in mind when I read out the decisions that we make behind closed doors after we come out from behind closed doors. Okay, so move in a seconder for the procedural motion. Councillor De Vries moving, Councillor Johnston seconding. I'll call the vote. Councillor Burns, do you want to vote before you disappear? Thank you. Okay, the procedural motion's carried unanimously.
Are you going to the Rapid tomorrow?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then you go to lunch.
Hmm?
Then you go to lunch.
Yeah, but it's a lunch meeting. That's right.
Life's tough.
Yeah.
Hmm? We're going to have dinner, aren't we? Well, I think it's going to be for the next couple of days. That's why I'm asking about the wrap. I'm thinking might need to go on a poncho. Hmm? Yeah, but you got a big body. I think got a little way. Yeah, but I mean, he didn't make a statement. If he made a statement, it would have got pulled out.
Okay, we're back out from behind closed doors, and I confirm that Council's made a number of resolutions. In relation to agenda item 13.1, which was decided behind closed doors, pursuant to section 5.232C of the Local Government Act, Council resolved as follows. Firstly, that 2 Upham Street, Subiaco, WA, is disposed of to Tarkine Property Proprietary Limited, ACN 675707981, for $15,500,000 exclusive of GST, noting that no submissions were received during the local notice period relating to the proposed sale. Point 2, the Chief Executive Officer is authorised to invest 50% of the proceeds of sale into the Aware Investment Fund Class B, with a proposal for the remaining 50% to be submitted to Council for consideration at a future ordinary Council meeting. And thirdly, the Chief Executive Officer is authorised to execute any documents, deeds and agreements necessary to give effect to this resolution. In relation to 13.2, which was also decided behind closed doors in accordance with section 5.232C of the Local Government Act, Council resolved. Firstly, that Unit 1, 23 Bishop Street, Jollymont, WA, is leased to Folk Spaces Proprietary Limited, consistent with the terms contained in this report and otherwise on terms acceptable to the city. And secondly, the Chief Executive Officer is authorised to execute any documents, deeds and agreements necessary to give effect to this resolution. In relation to further confidential item AR1, which was decided behind closed doors in accordance with section 5.232F of the Local Government Act, Council resolved, firstly, that the outcome letter for the Audit Action Register internal review dated 18 April 2024 is noted, and secondly, the recommendations included in the outcome letter are accepted. And finally, in relation to agenda item AR2, which was also decided behind closed doors pursuant to section 5.232F of the Local Government Act, Council resolved that firstly, the audit report for the Environmental Health Internal Review dated 1 May 2024 is noted, and secondly, the recommendations and management actions included in the audit report are accepted. Well, councillors, that brings us to the end of tonight's agenda, so I declare the ordinary council meeting of the 28th of May 2024 closed at 7:47 p.m. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, staff.